We live inside a construct below a vast programmed illusion that we call the sky. It is filled with mystery, a detailed picture that shows us either events that happened long ago or those that will transpire in the future. It is easy to be confused. It's easy because we're trained to believe that we exist in a real world, in a real cosmos. You know, you're comfortable in your paradigm. I hear the moon is a reflection of the Earth's continents. The world is flat, so nothing you say can be true about the sky. I hear the moon is a hologram, so how can holograms fall? I see this merging, this attempt to marry other paradigms. Everything in the sky is simulated. I've never been more clear about that. That the moon we see today was not always in our sky automatically brings into dismissal many things that are believed about it. If we can show that there was a period in our history where the moon did not exist, and that its appearance suddenly caused a major cataclysm, then this automatically nullifies some popular theories across YouTube and social media. I know that we live in the simulacrum, and this field is always teaching us, showing us probable paths and possible futures. So, in 1901, Hans Schindler Bellamy was born. He is the author of the research in this video. And at this exact same time of 1901 and 1902 and 1903, Hans Horberger was formulating a totally new radical theory of world history that the scientific establishment would later make war against. They ignore people like me. They ignore people that don't have the credentials to even be peer-reviewed. But Hans Horberger was a threat because he was an inventor, and he was a great critical mind, and he was peer-reviewed. He goes and he explains the Thunderbird of ancient times that was so feared by the Native Americans, and gives a lot of associations. He explains that the Thunderbird was nothing but the dragon of the old world. In fact, he goes into a lot of detail about there are two dragons that periodically show up in the sky, and they bring cataclysms. But the ancients always knew that these destructions were not they weren't caused by a single dragon. There were two different dragons that appeared over. And he says this. He shows all these associations in different ancient records. What shocked me when I read the book is now a lot of the things in the biblical material that has been sanitized about Behemoth and Leviathan makes sense. The dragons were responsible for everything. He goes into Armenian feathered monster called Van and the Egyptian phoenix. He taught me something about the phoenix. I did not know that in Egyptian the phoenix was well known. It was called Bakbahu, or Bakbahu, which means to water or to flood. But the designation for the phoenix in the Egyptian hieroglyphs was three wavy lines, from which we got Aquarius. So, the flood. And you guys already know from my research, the phoenix is what caused the Great Flood in 2239 BC. So I got much appreciation for this material because he's coming from a different vantage point, and he's being very specific that the capture flood that involved the moon has nothing to do with the later Great Flood of biblical fame. So I thought that's another very interesting point. At the time of the Great Flood, it was called the Year of the Raging or Red Shining Serpent, Year of the Serpent, in the old antediluvian calendars. And he explains in Jewish myths, we are told that Leviathan and Behemoth always appear before a flood. In fact, and remember, Leviathan and Behemoth are the two dragons that appear in the sky. In all the dragon myths, the monsters only appear in times of stress. The deluge and creation myths are reports of the cataclysmic end of the tertiary age, of the catastrophic breakdown of the predecessor of our present moon. In cosmic ice theory, we have a situation of two moons being in the ancient world, but they weren't here at the same time. There was a moon here before the moon that we have now, and it totally fragmented and broke apart and caused an epic cataclysm. Later on, this other moon appeared, the one for which we have in the sky now, and there was a period of time when civilizations were recording that there was no moon in the sky. This was the time between those two moons. So this is the cosmic ice theory, Greek mythology about Typhon. I showed you Typhon as Fiend, the Fiend, Typhon. It's the youngest son of Gaia and Tartarus, Typhon being the phoenix. He goes into detail about how the phoenix brings flames. Zeus tried to attack it with a thunderbolt, but the actual phoenix from the ancient world is the personification of volcanic and seismic forces. Remember all the volcanoes and all the earthquakes that I have documented that were all attached to phoenix phenomenon dates? He says, after the Great Flood, men were found no more. The hills and valleys were covered with a fine loam and loess, a legacy of the dead satellite, which was recognized as being a new, unfamiliar thing. Its brownish or reddish color all over the ground was taken as evidence that it was the material into which the dead had been transformed. So this cataclysm occurs in ancient times. Something breaks open the sky. It rains all over the ground, and the survivors see this red mud. They see this everywhere, and in their minds, this is what happened to their moms and dads and brothers and sisters and wives and husbands. What's left over after this cataclysm, all the people are gone. The people are gone, and what's left is all this fallout, red fallout from the sky. Yeah, I couldn't believe when I read that. I was like, wow. Another thing that Hans Bellamy brought to my attention that I did not know about previously, I got it from his research, was that he says the epic of the mundane era of the Maya, on the other hand, was established in the year 3373 BC. I have that in Chronicon. So, and then he says, by their calculation, it went by heptads of bactons, or 2,760 years. He's claiming the Maya were measuring the periodicity of the appearance of the dragons in the sky. He properly identifies Typhon and Phoenix with the ancient Egyptian Set. He says it right here, they are the same, and that they even had a nickname for Set, which was Apepi, the dragon of darkness. Both Apepi and Set are regarded as lords of evil and darkness, and Apepi is also called the Roarer. This is very, very intriguing. Remember, Phoenix brings this thundering humming coming from the sky that vibrates all kinds of physical objects. Yeah, causes liquefaction, all this stuff. So it's calling Apepi, Phoenix, Typhon, Set. It's all the same phenomenon. It's all described in ancient texts as being the very same. They are all just epithets for the Phoenix. And he's saying right here, the roarer of Apepi is Set. Why didn't they just call it a dragon if it looked like a dragon in the sky? I mean, why didn't they call it a satellite if the moon, whatever? He says the biblical tower myth becomes clear, however, if we regard the tower as what it really was, as a model of the mountain which safeguarded the ancestors, a model which, to a certain extent, practically, but chiefly, magically, was in its turn to save the sons from the deluge. The Tower of Babel story, according to him, was just that, a story after the flood. But what it's really talking about was the building of the Great Pyramid as a way to save the descendants of the builders. That's profound, and it's very relevant to the Archaix output. So, he says, according to the myth preserved in the Bible, this tower of theirs was never finished. What's missing on the top of the Great Pyramid? From the very beginning, I told you guys that structure was never completed. Sorry about the little interruption. I turned my video off. My dogs are all going haywire. Okay. But Bellamy's revealing something to us very profound. So let's continue. The wicked wanted to escape this punishment concerning the flood when they're building the Great Pyramid. Hence the divine anger, and hence a certain amount of divine fear. For apparently the tower builders had other thoughts in their minds as well. And if their plans were not nipped in the bud, nothing will be restrained from them, which they had imagined to do. As the Lord said when he came down one day to have a look at the city and the tower which the children of men, a tribe of different race from the one that he favored, were building. Yeah, this guy's very well read. He may have had access to a lot of materials that we just don't have anymore. But this is some profound stuff. So he continues with Yosipon Mika Ben Gurion, the memory of repeated floods and the necessity of propping the unstable firmament to prevent further cataclysms. The people of that time said, we know that in each eon, every 1656 years, the vault of heaven breaks to pieces. Let therefore strong pillars be built as supports, one in the north, one in the south, and one in the west. This tower here shall be the prop in the east. They built a tower high enough to withstand the onrush of waters, strong enough to resist fire. And they said to themselves, and in the tower, let us put engines automatically discharging projectiles that kill anyone approaching who wants to take our stronghold by storm. So on the tower they set a winged image, robot guns with automatic range finders, and aim indicators to be used against the god armed with thunderbolts. Even if this is only a myth in the ordinary sense of the word, an idle wonder tale, it is unique. He's still talking about the building of the Great Pyramid. His book is not about the Great Pyramid. So these are just asides all throughout his historical narrative. So he says, their towers were the buildings of heaven-storming titans, attempting an offensive at great odds. According to Bellamy, the Tower of Babel is just a story in the Bible that's actually masking a real event, which is the building of the Great Pyramid, and that the people built the Great Pyramid because they had an idea to oppose the gods. They knew the gods were bringing these destructions on them, and they wanted to put a stop to it. He said, we have shown the connection between the building of the towers and the Great Flood, a connection which is stressed by the myths themselves, whether they come from the Eastern Hemisphere or from the Western. But we do not want any misunderstanding to arise as to the age of the ziggurat, of Burj Nimrod, or of the Cholula Pyramid in America, or of any other building now in existence, which may be classed under the tower heading. The myths are older than those buildings. That is amazing. He's absolutely correct. Burj Nimrod isn't very old. It's in Iraq. Yeah, and the Cholula Pyramid is gigantic, but it's not the Tower of Babel. It's not the Great Pyramid. And it's not near as old. So, he says, nevertheless, the pyramids jut out into our world from the days before the dawn of history. And he's right to an extent. They do. Because the Great Pyramid of Giza, built and finished in 2815 BC, was finished before humans ever started transmitting writing onto perishable and non-perishable mediums. Because when it was built, we were technologically advanced. We didn't have no reason to do all that. So now, let's go to the next section. So, Bellamy, he goes into some detail about the vapor canopy, but he never calls it the vapor canopy. To him, it's the firmament above. And it was an ocean that was suspended high in the sky. He says that Genesis chapter 1, verses 3 through 5, he says, and God said, let there be light. And God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. Bellamy says, what is meant is after a time, the thick cloud cover came down in tremendous hailstorms and cloudbursts, and the difference between an unbroken light time and an unbroken night time became distinctly marked. Bellamy goes into a lot of detail that Genesis 1 describes a cataclysm and the renovation, the healing of our world after a total destruction, something that I've told you many times and in many presentations provided you my own evidence. Bellamy spends a lot of time explaining this and how it relates to Genesis and Revelation. He says the snow mentioned in the above passages he's talking about the book of Ezekiel and other prophecies and eschatology. He says the snow mentioned in the above passages is really the wreckage from the old shattered firmament, which is professedly built of terrible ice. Ezekiel chapter 1 verse 22 and various Jewish myths. Recently, I've gone into detail about the glaciations and the false chronology of the ice ages, explaining that the collapse of the vapor canopy is what created that amount of snow. Here it is, right here in Bellamy's own book. And this was his theory way back then. So remember, there's over 60 different theories as to how an ice age could even be possible. Scientists push it off as fact, but there are no scientists in agreement about how it could be possible, because it requires humidity. In order to create that much snowpack ice all the way up. And we don't have that. There is no humidity at the polar extremes. That's why today they only get 1 inch of snow a year. So something major must have happened to put all that snow there. It would have been very fast. This is the difference between catastrophism and uniformitarianism. These are the only two schools of historical analysis. You're going to be one of the other. Many people think they're catastrophists, but they use uniformitarian dating. Therefore, they're uniformitarian. They're not catastrophists. A catastrophist admits that we go by the evidence, we go by the traditions, and that the world can be destroyed and very suddenly. And then 400, 500, 600 years later, it can happen all over again. Uniformitarians is a different school, and it does its best to try to convey that all these catastrophes and all these events and myths and legends happened over hundreds of thousands and even millions of years. All untrue. So just remember that. That is the distinction between uniformitarianism and catastrophism. Catastrophists have unlimited data. It's all over the world. Everybody can see it for themselves. Uniformitarians have to come up with all kinds of arbitrary and abstract procedures to say the things that they say. For a reason. They have to get you to agree that radioisotopes break down at a certain constant. Because they can't have any variance. It would throw all their carbon-14 and potassium argon dates off. And all that. Yeah, it's just ridiculous. All the mental hoops we have to go through to accept uniformitarianism. When, very simply, you can just be a catastrophist and go by the evidence. So, anyway, we have he says that there's an Aztec myth. Says that the moon itself was undone by a great fire. In the beginning, the world was a dark place. It was very dark in the world, as the sun had not yet been created. The goddess Medzith knew that this state of things could only be remedied by a great sacrifice, so she built a huge pyre upon which she burnt Nanhuatl, the leper. Then she threw herself onto the flames. Thereupon the sun appeared in the heavens. This is a vapor canopy collapse story. She's the goddess. She's the goddess. She's the moon goddess. She was attacked, which was the vapor canopy collapsing. Now she's no longer magnified at nighttime. Now she goes down to a smaller size. And now with the vapor canopy gone during the daytime, you can see the sun. You can see the sun just fine. Whereas before, all that light was diffused through the canopy, and you just saw a brightness, you never saw the sun. Now that all the sun calendars began, the Aztec myth is dead on. He said on another page that this goddess, Medza, who is also addressed as the bright and dark lady of the heavens, was avowedly the moon goddess herself. He says, we can gather from the extent of the so-called continental shelves that up to a certain period in the Earth's past, generally considered to be the later tertiary age, the land area of our planet was considerably greater. Then, however, and probably rather suddenly, the shelves were submerged. The oceans, it is believed, received great quantities of water which had been tied in the huge polar caps of the glacial period. We do not deny this, but this quantity would not have sufficed to raise the waters suddenly to their present level. We are therefore forced to seek their origin outside the earth. That's a profound statement, and I'm in total agreement. I'm in total agreement, because the waters that he's looking for, that he thinks were peeled off the surface of the moon and pulled onto the earth to raise the ocean levels, they were closer than the moon. They have nothing to do with the moon. The cosmic ice theory promotes that. It's called the Spilling Song, and it's called the Prelude to the End. But it's in the Rinda, one of the Eddas. But he goes into detail about it right here and explains that even the ancient Norse, they had a story. The Germans, a door was opened in heaven. And then he goes on to explain that the word heaven, Archaix, is descriptive of a great covering, a great shell around something else, a covering. He says the Mediterranean must be regarded as a very young sea because of the remarkable seismic and volcanic activity which we find in its basin. There are over 200 stone cities buried underwater in the Mediterranean. I have videos that explain that the Mediterranean was created in a day. In a day! When the Strait of Gibraltar broke at the Great Flood in 2239, Mediterranean Ocean is a new sea. The Mediterranean Sea, the Aegean Sea, Tyrrhenian Sea, all that is absolutely new. Those were valleys full of people when that area flooded. Okay, the first female being we read in the myths of the Jews, who was fashioned out of loam at the same time as Adam, was called Lilith. But she was intractable and would not subordinate herself to the will of her spouse, saying, "Are we not both made of the same substance?" Remember, you have to understand, in this book he's explaining the loam, where it came from. It's the fallout that comes from the sky that our ancients thought was their ancestors liquefied. And it falls down as red rain and red mud all over the sky. And according to Bellamy, the ancients believed that material, that red mud that fell from the sky from the cataclysm, is what God scooped up, put together to make Adam and Eve. Genesis chapter 1 is a reset story. It's not a creation. It's been masked as a creation by Jewish redactors. It's total reset. The world was absolutely destroyed. And here Lilith is throwing it in Adam's face. Are we not made from the same material, which is the organic compost left over from the world before? So, this was not a bit to the liking of Adam, and he bitterly complained of his wife's stubbornness to his maker, so he was separated from her, and Lilith became a vampire, which preyed upon the offspring that Adam had from his second helpmeet, Eve. This is how Eve was created. God sawed Adam in two. With her, as she was flesh of his flesh and bone of his bone, then they got on very well. It's kind of choppy, but that's how he wrote it. Guys, what we have here is the demonization of a female who didn't get along, who wasn't going with the program. We have here an image or the transposition of an older series of beliefs onto this newer Jewish belief. Lilith represents the goddess. Lilith is demonized into a vampire and a succubus. But that's only from a patriarchal perspective, of which the Jews maintained. So, it's very interesting. His creation story pulls all these elements out, and that Hans Bellamy was able to put this together. So he says, the antediluvian shore dwellers seem to have been quite aware of the impending disaster and fully prepared for it. Some of them even built their arks on high ground so as not to have them dashed in pieces on the shore when the first huge breakers of the deluge rushed inland. They waited for the waters to rise and carry their well-appointed vessels away. The only reason I wanted to mention this, that Hans Bellamy did, is because I told you guys in the past that the story of Noah and only 8 souls, it's a part of an ancient syllabus. It's where the Egyptians got their Ogdoad. It's the reason why this ancient syllabus was taught by the Amuru, and they spread it to all these different areas of kings, but it's not true. It's not true that only one ark survived. Hans Bellamy knows it's not true either. It's right here. Many people knew that this was coming, the Phoenix, and they prepared for it, and many arks made it. And that's how our world was repopulated. Not by one, but by many. So we're talking about whole fleets. Again, this is a hint that things I've been telling you guys is true. We were technologically advanced before the flood. We were able to prepare, project, see all these things. We were probably running simulations then. He says the Arawaks of British Guiana say that the wickedness of mankind so enraged him who lives on high, Ioman Kandi, I guess that's the name of God, that he twice ordered a general destruction. First he scourged the world with fire, and then he flooded it with water. A few men, however, contrived to escape from each catastrophe. They found refuge from the fall of fire in underground caverns. While at the time of the Great Flood, the ancestral chief, Marijuana, it almost sounds like marijuana, and his followers were able to escape in a canoe. A flood of fire preceded the Great Flood, and there's a distance in time between these two events. So, Bellamy here is telling us that humans lived in the underworld for a while. That's exactly what we find in Turkey, ancient Phrygia. It's Turkey today. I don't know. You could call it. It's gone. That area of the world is gone by so many different names. Lydia, Phrygia, Turkey, Hittite, Anatolia. It's all the same area. That's where the 60 underground cities have been found since 1962. And remember, I told you in prior presentations, there is a legend that we have preserved of a king called Archaix, who foresaw coming calamity, and he built a city in the underworld, and he hid his people in it to save them from what was going on the surface. He says the Tupi, this is a Native American people, they describe in their myths how the moon, with them, was the personification of all evil, falls periodically on the earth and destroys everything. Even nowadays, all baneful influences such as thunderstorms and floods are believed to be caused by that evil celestial body, the moon. There was a moon in the ancient world long before the moon we have now. And that, yes, maybe in tertiary times, maybe 13,000 years ago, whenever, it fell to Earth. It was the real moonfall. And it's the reason we have all these unique materials on our topsoil. Now, it was thousands of years later that another moon appeared. And when it appeared, it wrecked shop. It tore our world all up. It completely collapsed the technologically advanced civilization.